teaching of Christianity upon the students of Florida's public schools, let's investigate some of the biblical truths we think should be taught here on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. Or you can insult an atheist for only $2. That's right, this is the voice of atheism in Florida on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and very probably the most interesting program on the net. Callers can get a Get Out of Hell free card by calling in at 441-3000. You can participate in the program. Before we start, I just got to wonder, Kellyanne Conway going to President Trump complaining about being groped? You got to be joking me. You got to wonder how you took that one.
You mean by him or someone else?
Ed Golly with Joe Reinhardt, Judy Adkins, Jim Peterson, the Tan Talk studio. And go ahead and give us a call today at 441-3000. Let us know what you think about what we're talking about today on the Atheist Forum.
Well, Ed and Joe and Jim, I did some research on this bill, and
they don't know what you're talking about. What bill?
I'm getting there, Ed. Since 1997, Florida schools have been allowed to have an elective course for a secular program of education, including but not limited to an objective study of the Bible and religion in public schools. Well, this year they've introduced a bill, House Bill 195, which so far has not been copied into the Senate, which would make it a requirement that schools offer a secular program of education, including but not limited to an objective study of religion, an objective study of the Bible, including Hebrew scriptures and Old Testament, a course on the New Testament, and I don't understand this, but a course on the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament of the Bible, and the New Testament in the Bible. It states that students can't be required to use a specific translation as the sole text for the course. So there are hundreds of, that ought to stimulate a lot of discussion about why they're different. It would still be an elective at this point, but we have other states which are trying to make it a requirement, and I would imagine that come next year, they will be trying to make this a requirement.
Sure, I mean, that's the whole idea is if you can't get students out of the public schools into the voucher-supported private religious schools, then we'll bring the religion right into the public schools.
I hope it backfires on them, which it has very much the potential to do, for the reason that people will introduce secular ideas, and again, if this bill passes, they'd have to teach it as a secular course. And if that were the case, I mean, ideally, it wouldn't just be a Bible study, but religion and comparative religions as well. So while we're at it, we could study compare it sort of like communism versus capitalism back in the 60s was required. We could have a course on the Quran and the Torah and several other religious texts as well. So once the students began to see the diversity of religions, then they can ask themselves, which one is the one true religion? And they can't all be true, but they could all be false.
Well, they could. And let's be clear, this course is already available in public schools. The difference is that this is getting more specific about the Bible. And what has to be included in the course, and it does not. While it says an objective study of religion, the only books that are referred to are those of the Christian Bible. So it's not. I don't think it will be as broad a topic as we would like.
Any opportunity to serve as a mentor?
Well, it's not clear.
The county is seeking mentors. Always
yes,
is.
They are. But given that the bill is written by our friend and whatever you want to call her, Kim Daniels, who gave us the state motto required in the schools.
Our friend.
Yeah, the self-described demon buster,
Right.
And exorcist. And one of the co-sponsors of the bill is quoted as stating, "A study of a book of creation by its creator is absolutely essential." So why not? It's the book that prepares us for eternity, and there's no other book that does that. I would think Islam would disagree with that. The Mormons would disagree with that. The Scientologists would disagree with that.
But clearly what he's saying is this is the right book and all the
Yes.
rest of them are just made up
Exactly.
stuff. So
Exactly.
we'll bring them into the curriculum just
Actually,
for
about
comparison, but in fact, we know which one the real one is and we're going to teach that.
About 2/3 of the people on this planet would take issue with that.
Yes, exactly. Most of the Chinese are not Christian, and India, large segments of the population.
But that's exactly what the message is here. In order to be a real, true, red-blooded, flag-waving, patriotic American, you must also be a Christian. That's what he
Yes.
wants taught in the public school system.
And another one of my concerns is who's going to monitor this? Who monitors it now? We don't know what they're teaching in the schools in this course. It's an elective.
Yeah, there are very few schools which actually undertake to teach this elective, and usually it's a special class for honors. It's an honors class of some sort, and the reason for this is, can you imagine the chaos if this were a required course of all the people with contentious ideas about what should be taught? First off, what should be taught in the Bible, and what sort of Bible should be used. I mean, we've already looked at that, and it's just incredible. I think it would be, considering all the other issues that schools now have to deal with as we evolve through time, dealing with hundreds of other issues in society generally that occupy schools. The question of which Bible to use could just bring the whole thing stumbling down.
But I wonder too if this is really a recognition of the fact that the demographic from 18 to 32 has a staggeringly disproportionate percentage of non-believers. And the Christians are beginning to realize that, geez, we're losing this next generation that we want to carry on with it. So we better grab them even in the public school because we're not getting them into the churches.
Especially if we have government validation of our ideas.
Yeah, and these classes can start in the 9th grade and go through the 12th grade.
Would you think that's part of the foundation of
I
this?
think it probably is, yes. They may not say that out loud, but
course they're not.
I do believe that they have blamed gun shootings and all kinds of things on not teaching God in the schools. So this is their way of bringing it back in a sense. And again, I think a comparative religion course, I would like to see it required. Like you referenced, Joe,
Right.
where people are taught about all the different religions going up from the earliest to the current, and about non-religion and how to live your life without being religious.
So what you're suggesting is the guidepost for morality should be the Christian God who wants to drown everybody in the entire world except
No.
one old drunk and 8 members of his family.
No, I am not
but that's what the bill is
Oh, yes,
suggesting, right?
yes,
This will
absolutely.
be the guidepost for morality and behavior.
Well, it's a good example of what little reason you need to kill your brother.
Yes.
Any
Yeah.
excuse will do.
And, there's a lot of facts and conditions that we can use to talk about how to objectively teach the Bible. And Ed has come up with a large list of
Recommendations.
Thank you, Ed.
Just some suggestions that we might think should be added into the curriculum so that it's fair and balanced, which is, of
Yes.
course, that's the stalwart of the conservative message, right? Fair and balanced. So as a public service, Atheists of Florida has gone ahead and taken the trouble to recommend a few additions to the curriculum that we consider would be essential to a comprehensive understanding of the Christian religion. So Joe, you'll be able to help us with this.
I hope.
I think we probably should start from the very beginning, since, as you said, Judy, nobody's monitoring this. We don't know what the curriculum is, but why not start with the beginning, with this the story of creationism, which they are attempting to validate with these courses, to say that if you're taught that creationism is a valid second opinion comparable to evolution, right, then we're going to make sure that you hear that in the public schools so that it becomes a coin toss. You just decide what you like better.
And they have
sciences.
a bill also to modify the requirements in science classes to teach the controversy, which would also reinforce the idea of this religion.
You're talking about the controversy between psychology and phrenology?
It doesn't say what specific controversy, so it could well be.
Could be.
Yes.
There's plenty of them, I'm sure.
There are plenty of controversies, yes.
But I wonder, are they going to teach us that the sun and moon were created on the fourth day, as is specified in the Bible, and expect these high school students to believe that? I mean, you've got to stop and wonder, if we had daylight and nighttime without a sun and moon, why bother to create them in the first place, right? It only confuses people with things like eclipses and, staggered different, we have to go on daylight saving time. Why even create it? Well, the obvious answer is that the authors of the Bible were so ignorant of fundamental astronomy, they didn't realize that the sun is the source of all the daylight. They thought it was simply a natural occurring incident. Just like my cat, you didn't think about it. She knows day or night, right? And so, how they're going to try to convince students that this is a viable alternative to the science that says that that the whole system is 4.5 billion years old, the sun came first, the planets formed. I have no idea how they're going to try to
Hopefully
sell
the
this, but-
course will go into exactly what one needs to do in order to separate the light from the darkness. And how you accomplish that, whether you keep it in a bottle under your bed or build a wall, or exactly how do you separate it? Or do you have to be supernatural to do that?
But again, I think it's just the challenge to science. What they're trying to convince the students of is that the science of evolution geology, these are just guesses that people made
Yes.
for some reason, and
Well,
there's no
they're
more
theories.
validity to
That's why they
that
call it a
than
theory.
than
But I have
than
to
what's in the
tell you
Bible,
that,
which there's no evidence.
When I was growing up in a fundamentalist church, it was that this was a test. God put the fossils and all
Yeah.
that stuff there because it's a test of your faith. That it's God can do anything, and thus does.
Yes, logically speaking, God could have invented the entire world 5 minutes ago, complete with all the fossils, with us thinking that we're whatever age we think we are, and just started it right there. There's no logical reason why this could not be the case under the theistic interpretation of reality.
Well, these are the sort of things that people opine about when they're typically hallucinating at the same
Yes,
time, as to, we could all be part of someone else's dream, or we all live in a matrix, or
We don't have to necessarily incorporate the disciplines of logical reasoning and mathematics and science or anything else for that matter.
well, no, those
very
are
easy.
useless. In fact, they're undesirable in the field of religion because they
definite
bring us
impact.
back to some sort of foundation other than one of
Those
sand.
absolutes that
To absolutes.
reference.
And then
Someone
somehow
asked about that the other day.
we've got to qualify the fact that we can see light, the light of objects that are millions of light years away, right? And how to explain what's been going on while all that light was getting here, right? We're actually, when we look into the sky, we're looking at history.
Yes.
We're
Since
looking
there
at things that
are-
may not exist anymore.
There are 13.8 billion years worth of objects between us and presumably the beginning of the universe, all of them emitting light, and apparently God had to utter the words, "Let there be light," billions and billions of times
Right.
to get it started.
Well, when he said, "Let there be light," there was still nothing to be seen, but at least it was well lit.
That's true. But see, that's the thing. He gave the command to somebody to turn on the lights. That somebody, that's the guy I want to meet.
Yeah,
that's
right.
the guy that can get
Yeah,
things
the one
done.
who
He's the guy that writes the
Somebody
checks.
has, yes, gets the results. Any jerk can just give out orders. I want to know who actually fulfills them. That's the important guy in this equation. Let's move on before we go to our break to some other things that we think could be taught in this curriculum. For example, the suppression of females, children's, homosexuals. This is prevalent throughout I guess the Old Testament. I'm not a student of the Bible, but it's a recurring theme that men are the dominant element of the whole world, and
Yes.
that everything else is subservient to the men. Anybody who doesn't fit the conventional male standard should be killed. This, I think, is a very important lesson to teach high school children, don't you?
Well, speaking of high school children, one of the solutions after the Columbine shooting was to put a copy of the Ten Commandments in every classroom, of which 8 out of 10, the penalty for breaking any of those commandments is death.
Right.
It's a good example to set for students on how and
That'll teach them to disobey their parents,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
dishonor their parents.
Oh, yeah.
Just kill them.
They'll stone them to death.
I thought what you were going to say is 8 out of 10 of them are actually restrictions. Only 2 of them are commandments, which are honoring your parents and keeping the Sabbath day somehow
And
special.
no other God before this God.
Well, that's a restriction. They're saying
Well,
you
that's-
can't put another
yeah,
God before.
okay.
You can't kill. You can't commit adultery. You can't do all the things that our president does.
Yes.
Right.
Well, if you can't put another God before that God, where would you put him?
Oh, I thought you were going to say it's an admission that there were other gods, which
Well,
of
that's
course
true.
there were, right?
Yes, there were a lot of other gods at the time.
Yes.
And where do you put him?
I think maybe if they combined the religion classes with the logic classes, that we could kill 2 stones with 1 bird.
Yes.
And basically improve the average student's ability to make objective judgments based on
Yeah.
some sort of value system other than sheer do as you're told.
And a lot of the schools emphasize that they want to teach critical thinking. But this is like the opposite of critical thinking.
But would it compel kids to compare the Ten Commandments with the Bill of Rights? I hear so many people say
Yeah.
that they
Now
are
they learn civics and logic
inextricably
all
linked.
at the same time.
Yes.
Great idea.
Yes, but
Well, I do think that you're right, Ed, that
Yeah.
that would be a great comparison for them
so
to
many people
make.
propagate this myth that all of our civil liberties, our system of democratically elected government, and our civil rights, our Constitution, all come directly from the Bible. Well, that's because the people who think that know not what is in either document. And
Right.
so it's just a rote assumption that there's a connection because they're taught that both are really great institutions, therefore they must be connected. But if one really objectively analyzes them, you see they're completely opposite commodities or governing foundations, right? Because all through Western European what would you say, relatively modern history up until about, 300 years ago, those were all Christian societies, right? And they were all kingdoms. And as I've said more than once, what difference is there between a kingdom and a dictatorship?
Not much.
Synonymous.
But they were subscribing
Yes.
to biblical teachings, right? All the kings were divinely appointed, right?
Yes.
Nobody had any right to question them?
Well, Trump is divinely appointed, according to Kellyanne.
Yeah.
And that
Paula
quack-
White
And Sarah Sanders.
Sanders.
That's
Yeah,
so-
you're right.
Huckabee.
So why do we even have elections? Why don't we just go ask the Pope who's going to be our president?
I have a real quick list of other things that they ought to teach the students, particularly since as children themselves, when they find out that it's perfectly okay for their parents to kill them, they might straighten up just a little bit. But the Bible advises us to stone your son to death, burn your daughter, cut off your testicle.
Duncan's on the line.
Take the 32,000 virgins and throw them to the troops.
Duncan's on the line.
Get drunk and get your daughters pregnant. Kill everything that moveth, or better yet, sell your daughters into slavery. So For those of you who don't care to keep the commandment to honor your father and your mother, keep in mind the consequences of not doing that, apart from not getting your inheritance. You'd be lucky enough to
Okay.
outlive them, let alone to inherit anything.
Well, I wanted to move on to the endorsement of slavery in the Bible, but we have a caller on the phone that would like to weigh in with
We've
us.
only got a couple
and-
minutes before the
Yeah, 3 or
break.
4 minutes. We'll take a
So,
break. So
yeah.
let's hear what you have to say, caller.
Yeah, my question for you is, you gentlemen are moralizing about other people's behaviors in the law, and I'd like to know, as atheists, since in a previous call last week and the week before, you said that you didn't believe in any absolutes. If you don't believe in any absolutes, where do you have any objective grounding for morals or objecting to anybody's behavior or conduct?
Well, the basis for morals in the Bible, or anywhere else for that matter, throughout life, throughout the experience of mankind on this planet, has been the experience of social life. Humankind has certain characteristics. We are generally weak and ineffectual animals, but we can protect ourselves and we can succeed by coming together, by cooperating with each other. And
Is that objective?
out of that cooperation, these are objectively, there is objectively measurable evidence to support.
How can you have objective evidence when all the panelists all agree that you don't believe in any absolutes?
Well, absolutes have nothing to do with it.
Well, how can you ground something as objective if there's no absolute? If everything is changing and nothing is absolute, how can you have any objectivity at all?
I don't see the contradiction here.
No, if you have no absolutes, then everything is simply a sea of change. You have nothing to ground objectivity in.
That's
The
not
universe
true.
is a sea of
That's
change.
simply not true, so there's no point in explaining why one needs objectivity and one needs...
No,
wait a minute, let me finish,
How can
please.
you have
Do I get a chance to
objectivity without
finish?
absolute?
Hold on.
Do I get a chance to finish? Because the question I have for you is, what makes you think that absolutes are necessary in order to have morality and in order to be objective? I think you're simply wrong in your base assumption.
That's not
And
what
so,
I said.
I beg your pardon?
That's
You
not what I
ask
said.
me, how can I be objective and how can I have morality if I don't have absolutes? And I'm asking
No,
you,
that's
what makes
not-
you
that's not
think
what
you
I
need
said.
absolutes? Well, what did you
That's not what
say?
I said.
Can you repeat it in 25 words or fewer?
Yeah, that you were moralizing about other people's behavior in context of what you liked or didn't like. I said, how can you have objective morality? I didn't ask you how you could have morality. I said, if there are no absolutes, you have no basis or ground.
Okay, well then I'll rephrase the question. What makes you think it's necessary to have absolutes in order to have objective morality? Your basic assumption is wrong. Why don't you prove to me that there's some necessary nexus between the two?
So my basis assumption is wrong, that without any absolute, you can make a definitive statement. How would, if you don't have anything that is absolute that you're reasoning from, then all your assertions are without ultimate basis, sir.
That's an
How can you
argument
make
by
an
assertion, Duncan.
How can
Can you make an argument? Can you give us some proof for that other than
I can.
assertions?
Yeah, it necessarily follows with the rejection that something is fundamentally absolute and unchanging, that you can therefore make a statement of the case that something is without it not necessarily being.
That's an argument by
how
assertion.
I have a question
Well-
for you. I'm assuming that you
Okay, so
think
hold
the
on. I
Bible
wanna
is
finish answering
absolute.
him.
I
I
assume,
didn't mention the Bible. I'm
I
asking
know
the
you
gentleman.
didn't. I'm asking you,
How-
do you assume
Okay.
that the Bible is absolute?
Okay, I believe that the Bible is the absolute authority, but I didn't raise that issue. The issue.
I
is
know you
in
didn't, but I'm trying to find out something.
At least we have a
So-
concrete example of the
So-
Bible being absolute.
So as a disobedient son, your parents have a right to kill you.
Okay. Well, first of all, what I'd like to know is, how can you assert that something is the case when you have no ultimate foundation for anything? Can you answer that?
It's a social agreement. Have you ever heard of a social
No,
contract?
You're not understanding it.
I'm
Philosophically,
understanding
the world
exactly
is
what you're
different.
saying.
If there are no absolutes,
Is it
how
time
can
for
you
a break?
assert that anything
Yeah.
is the case? Can you explain
I
that?
think so.
Listen, Duncan, We've explained it a dozen times, and it never seems to satisfy you. And you won't ever give us a straight answer. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back after a few words about Atheists of Florida. Yeah, right.
For my question.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Right here, live and in color on the Tan Talk Radio Network, the Atheist Forum, and we welcome your participation at 441-3000. And our quote for the day is from Joe here.
My quote for today is, in fact, from Stephen Wright, and it is, "Half the people you know are below average." That's a scary thought, and don't ever forget that, callers and viewers.
We're talking about the prospect of the bill that's working its way through the state legislature, or probably will when they come into session, about eventually mandating the teaching of comparative religions and the Bible in our public school system. And
Not comparative religions.
Oh, not yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
Just religion.
Just religion.
We already have a law that allows comparative religion.
No.
But this one wants to specialize in the Bible, Christian
Yes,
Bible,
yeah.
mainly.
And some of the suggestions that we have to include in the curriculum, for example, slavery. Slavery is, as you've said more than once, Joe, of all the things in the Bible that are contradicted elsewhere in the Bible, there is only one thing that you've ever found that isn't contradicted, and that, of course, is the endorsement of slavery, which is why the Baptists, I believe, separated from Northern and Southern over the issue of slavery.
Right, Southern Baptists.
Northern Baptists thought it was really a horrendous way to treat humans, and the Southern Baptists said, well, God endorses it. What's the question? What are we arguing about here?
There's an absolute for you.
Yeah. But anyway, I wonder, would this be something that would be taught? The fact that I think it's Exodus 22, Jesus teaches you how to beat your slaves, how...
Well, we meet Jesus. We don't hear from
Right.
him until the New
Oh,
Testament.
okay.
That's right.
That's right. So,
But it does tell
But it
us
does-
that you can beat them as long as they can walk within a day or two. And
who owns their children and how long indentured servitude needs to be required to be fulfilled.
well, that only applied if you were Jewish, a Hebrew. You could serve out your time as a slave unless you took a wife while you were a slave, in which case she stayed a slave, and as did your children. And if you didn't want to give up your wife and children, then you could opt to just remain a slave permanently. So you had some options. That only applied if you were Hebrew. Anybody else, once you're in, you're in.
In the Old Testament is where you principally find references to slavery and its justification. And I think it's important to remember that in the Old Testament, their economy was based on exploitation and subservience. Early religion was made possible by the buildup of surpluses in agricultural and food production. Some of the earliest archaeological discoveries made anyway, this place in Turkey, 12,000 years old. It's an extraordinary piece of architecture, actually. And but it was put up by a Bronze Age society, still embroiled in the hunting and gathering phase of civilization, and just on the edge of becoming an agricultural power. And it's this agricultural changeover that made possible the accumulation of wealth and the basis of trade. War was also an effective means of prosperity by the religiously sanctioned appropriation of slave labor. So it worked for them on a variety of ways, as long as you were the slave owner, of course. But for all people throughout the Middle East, it was at that point in time was a pretty horrible experience. People lived very short lives. Education and access to public benefits was virtually non-existent. So it's not the kind of thing that we could use for an example for our society. In fact, we found it to be appalling.
Particularly when we apply that to the idea of creationism. I like a little anecdote by Robert Ingersoll where he tells a story about a father who takes his young son out into the woods and is talking about creation and how beautiful the trees and everything works together. And he comes upon an egret in the pond, and he talks about how perfectly designed and created it is to move silently through the water and to see the fish and to spear it with its beak every time. And the child says, well, that's really fascinating, Dad, but it doesn't sound like much of an arrangement for the fish. That's how slavery works.
Yeah, I was going to say something.
Which, in today's world is obsolete, right? It wouldn't be practical to own slaves anymore. It's more practical to simply hire the labor
As needed.
Exactly, overseas, right? In a sweatshop
Everybody's
overseas.
got a side hustle now.
That's right.
Yeah, here it stopped being practical in the middle of the 19th century. The Civil War was practically fought over a useless institution from a strictly economic standpoint, but obviously it had moral problems too.
So the other going on from there is like you said earlier, the status of women and children in society. And it's funny because Joe and I were talking about hats in the church, and I found the Corinthians, I think it was, that says that women have to wear hats because to cut off their hair would be criminal, and they are to glorify men. And so that's why they can't cut their hair, which is kind of church I grew up in where women weren't allowed to cut their hair. But and children being property and women being property was part of the social contract of the time, because men had to know who the children belonged to. So it's one of those things that it was. I don't think that most women, there are some women who would go back to where they have to obey their husband and can only do what he says. But I don't think you'd have a lot of women who would be happy with that.
Speaking of women, are they going to really try to sell this virgin birth idea in the public school system? Are they going to explain that this is like an alternative fact or something?
Abstinent doesn't work every time.
Well, funny you should say that, because next week we're going to have somebody on the program who's going to talk about sex education in our school system. But yes, the virgin birth. And I still haven't quite figured that out because Mary was probably, 12, 13 years old
Somewhere around there. Yeah.
at the time and may not have even hit puberty, but probably did since they...
But why bother? If you're God, you just make this happen.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Well, one of the interesting things is that a lot of the messianic figures who arose in the Middle East around the time that
Right.
that Jesus supposedly appeared, and there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of them even, and almost all of them had similar characteristics, one of which was that they were born of a virgin. And the reason why this was so was because for them to be fathered by, and it's always fathering, by a mortal being would remove their claim to divinity.
Kind of diminish that
That's
exceptionalism
right.
that
That's
they
right.
have, right? Yeah.
So therefore, their mother always had to be a virgin, because otherwise it wouldn't have worked out for them.
Okay.
Antonio's on the line.
Well, you're listening to the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and one of our listeners would like to check in with us, comment, or insult us, or whatever. Go ahead.
Welcome.
Antonio, thanks for calling.
How you guys doing today?
Okay,
Fine, thank you.
hope you're well.
You too, I hope.
Yeah,
What's
I
up?
just want to comment on
We got an
one
hour.
of the previous callers. You said for one of the previous callers that he couldn't really make any absolutes or anything like that. My question is or he doesn't have to have absolutes or something like that? Is that what you said?
I said, I asked him what made him think that it was necessary in order to have absolutes, in order to have an objective morality, which is the question he keeps asking us. And so I asked him, well, just give us the answer. You know, I don't know the answer. I don't even care. But if you'll give us the answer, we'll all be better off. He never seems to get around to that. Maybe you know the answer. I don't.
Well,
Why is it required to have a belief in absolutes in order to have objective morality? I don't see why there's a connection required.
Well, the reason why that is because if you don't have any absolutes, then no statement can ultimately, and that's the key word, no statement can ultimately mean anything.
Well, of course, every statement means something. I mean, if you consider that we live in a universe which is just packed full of change, we ourselves are the creatures of change. We were born, we're going to die. We live in a society which is always changing, which is fortunate because we like to think that we're moving from a time of poverty into perhaps a time of prosperity, from a time of ignorance to a time of knowledge, and so forth. And we can control these things. And we do so by cooperating together, and from that arises a system of morality, how we treat each other. And I'm sure you would see that there's a distinct advantage in being able to reckon our actions according to the benefit to our fellow human beings and how we behave toward each other. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, in the concept of my worldview, we can account for something like that in the Christian worldview. But here's what I would ask you. Would you say that meaning can truly exist in a world of spontaneous occurrences?
Well, I don't think it's not a world of spontaneous occurrences. If that were to happen, it would be complete chaos and nothing would.
Things would be popping into existence right and left.
Yes, you'd have cats and dogs living together.
All right.
Terrible things would happen.
And so I think you're leaning towards the argument that we were created by some sort of being, rather than that we sprang into existence through some consequence of natural phenomena, which we loosely call evolution. Am I correct in that?
Well, all worldviews have what's called a terminus point, or an ultimate basis for how anything exists. So in a sense, you could say that's correct, but that applies to any particular worldview, whether you're a Christian or not.
Well, we are, in general, if I might characterize us here, all of us here, are materialists. We look out at the world, at the material world, as an adequate and sufficient explanation for everything we see, including ourselves. And how we behave, it's utterly adequate. And as we learn more and more about the world, as you're listening to what we've been talking about here, about the development of civilization from biblical times to the present, we see an evolution taking place. And it's taking place even now. So I hope that you'll keep us informed about any discoveries you might make along those lines, because we're constantly making them, and we urge our fellow people, our fellow humans, such as yourself, to keep an eye out and to allow yourself to experience the world of physical reality.
Well, that sounds interesting. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
When you ascertain anything in the natural world, does that require to use your sense perception to analyze these things?
It's all we have, pretty much.
Yeah, how do you do
But,
it?
I mean, X-rays, radio waves are things that you and I can't sense, but we've found ways to establish that they exist.
We can use those things.
We're using them right now.
Yes, exactly. That's why you're hearing us.
And finally, I didn't get a chance to respond to your earlier statement, and that is that if there needs to be some connection between absolutism and belief in absolutism and objective morality, then lacking that, everything we have said to date, for years probably, is meaningless. Now, it may be true that it's meaningless, but not for that reason.
what reason would it be then?
Well,
You
it would
don't
be
really
because,
know, then what
because we're
reason
so
would it
damn
be?
dumb we don't know any better. That would be the reason, but there's nothing absolute about that. I think we have another caller standing by, so we're going to...
Would you like a get out of hell free card?
What's that?
Would you like a get out of hell free card? It is transferable.
Yes, it is. Keep it or trade it.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
well said.
if you want the ultimate get out of jail free card, you would have to.
Yeah, well, no sermons. Just leave your phone number with the engineer, and we'll be happy to send you a card. You can use it anywhere you see fit, or see how far you can throw it. Okay?
You'll love it.
And you can throw it even further if you crumple it up first. All right, thanks for calling. We
Yes.
appreciate it.
All right, no problem. Have a good one.
You too.
You too.
Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Hello, thanks for calling.
Hey, this is Brojo speaking.
Okay, Bro Joe?
This is
Welcome.
Well, it's great to speak to you guys. I just have a few questions for you.
All right. Well, one at a time.
Okay. So you guys said that you were atheist and that you believe in pure materialism, which is to say that all that exists is the physical material universe. Does that follow that we are then subject to the laws of physics and chemistry?
I think it does. I mean, it's hard to escape the laws of physics and chemistry, isn't it?
Right. I don't know. How do you break the laws of physics?
And still
Right.
exist.
You're saying we don't usurp them?
We've stolen them in some way?
Usurp them? I don't get it.
I
What do
don't
you mean?
understand.
Yeah, expand on
So
that.
at no point do we violate, do we go beyond them?
We violate the laws of physics? I just said, I don't think it's possible to break the laws of physics, the laws of averages, or it's not possible to break the law of gravity.
Our reactions are just what? We're just pure matter in motion in a sense, right? We're just a piece of moving matter over against a piece of matter that's not moving. Would you agree with that?
Well, I guess what it really boils down to is that we're looking for an explanation that is consistent with our experience of the world as we encounter it. And it seems to me that the first thing that we have, the thing that is most immediate to all of us, and is the stuff of which we ourselves are composed, and that is material. We are all atoms and
So we're just
molecules.
pure.
Yes?
Okay, great. So you just believe that we're just matter in motion, nothing more, nothing less.
Well,
Okay,
that's what
so
the
we're
evidence,
prone-
that's
Right.
what the evidence,
Yes.
as we see it,
Yes.
yes. Uh-huh.
So,
You have
so
some other
we're
evidence, I'd
prone-
love to see it.
We are particularly talkative versions of matter.
Right, so we're just matter in motion. We're speaking matter in motion.
Well-
We're still subject to the laws of physics and chemistry. So your reaction or your statement are only what products of the laws of physics and chemistry. Just whatever you're just saying, whatever the laws of physics require you to say, right?
Well,
You're
the laws of
subject
physics
to them.
doesn't mandate what we can say. I mean,
Maybe
we are creatures
maybe
of...
one factor involved.
Yes, yeah, because we
Anyway,
we also do music and art and
And we also have time constraints, so
Yeah.
you have a point, we'd like to hear it.
Right. Well, so the point is, if you're a naturalist and you believe that all that we are is just, first of all, that exists is the physical material universe. When you believe that, what you're saying is we're subject to those laws. All of our conclusions that we reach, because our mind is just chemical reactions, neurons firing back and forth, are pure reactions to the laws of physics and chemistry. And in one sense, if we were able to figure out all the factors that go into our process of thinking, it could be considered predictable, our responses. If that's the case, if naturalism is true in that our minds are subject to the laws of physics and chemistry, then we have no reason to believe naturalism is true. It's just the laws of physics and chemistry requiring our brains to believe it, right? And so the reason I'm a Christian is just that my brain fits in one particular manner and your brain fits in another. So if your position is true, you have no reason to believe your position is true. You're just required to do so.
well, fortunately, the laws of physics and chemistry are manifested in phenomena that are so extraordinarily complex that it can incorporate a total human personality. Everything we think, all of our memories, all of our abilities, everything we make and everything we see and hear and sense is part of the physical universe and needs no
Right.
other explanation. It doesn't mean...
But they're just
And
it doesn't mean that we are the playthings of an indeterminate and impersonal matter. We are the persons who are in matter, and we can, to some extent, we've learned how to control our own world, and so it's rewarding.
So I think you're arguing then, but I think you're arguing that there's some sort of deity involved, or ought to be involved. And if that's the case, am I correct that you're arguing in favor of a deity or a divine creator?
No, I haven't brought up any deity or a divine creator. In fact, I haven't argued for that. What I've simply said is that.
I know what you simply said, but I'm asking you, are you making, is that some argument in favor of creationism?
What I'm arguing in favor of is if naturalism is true, argumentation is impossible because arguments assume that there's a method by which we can reason. But if naturalism is true, there is no reason. It's just chemical reactions firing back and forth because they're prone to follow the law.
Well, that's a bad analogy, and it's not true. And because if it were true, you'd be hearing nothing but gibberish, just like we're hearing.
Oh, okay.
Well, Bojo, we want to thank you for calling, and certainly you have displayed great facility with rhetoric and logic and rationality.
What's your relationship to Duncan?
To develop that.
What's your relationship to Duncan? I mean, it's no coincidence that every week now we get 3 calls in a row, and they're all on the exact same topic. Are you Duncan?
Well, I don't believe that I am.
You don't believe that you are? You don't know for sure. Are you in some way related or associated with Duncan?
No, I'm not in any way related.
Never met him? Not his brother-in-law? Nothing like that?
I've listened to him call in on the show. I'm not his brother-in-law.
All right, fine. No, I appreciate it.
I'm willing to believe him. That's fine.
I'm gullible. Okay. As Phil
Well,
Silver
anyway,
said.
we have fun here, and we hope that you do too.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the call. Yeah.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left on the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk Radio Network. We're kind of reviewing a few of the things that we think might be included in the curriculum if the Bible is taught in the public schools. Anything else from any of the staff here that we haven't gotten to yet?
Well, I do think that the whole question of morality, if they are going to say that morality is only based in religion, that we need to be able to discuss that. And the other concern that I have, and probably more so, is who's going to monitor this and make sure that these classes are, in fact, objective and secular. Like I said earlier, I think it's a good idea to have an objective comparative religion study, starting with way back before history, from what we can learn from anthropological studies on the influence of religion in society. But I want to know who's going to monitor this.
And the thing that strikes me about it is that for all the teachings about the Bible and creationism, there isn't a shred of evidence to support any of it. It's simply a book that was written by people who had virtually no science. And
That's
because
right.
their conclusion conflicts with what we've learned through science, I think the real basis of this whole initiative is to suggest that science should be questioned, challenged, and even rejected when it doesn't agree with what these people thought 1,500 or 2,000 years
The
ago.
entire Bible and the Quran, all of the activities described in both of those books takes place within about a 500-mile circumference.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little dot on the globe that they thought was the entire known universe, or that the entire universe revolved around their little spot on the globe. The Bible is basically written by a bunch of people that thought that it was an easy 2-day walk from anywhere to Noah's Ark.
Well,
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. I wanted to also point out that there's so many other aspects to this thing we haven't touched on yet, like racism, which was endemic to the people who made the Bible, who for the most part, as Joe just alluded to, never traveled more than 20 miles from their village, and were subject to frequent raids by enemies, that sort of thing. Another consideration is that the study of ancient religious texts, such as the Bible, is only valuable from a literary point of view. They provided a foundation for the evolution of the society and culture that followed, including our own. They can also be of help in understanding anthropological, ethnological, archaeological interpretations of ancient humans and how they lived and evolved. Church leaders were often highly motivated to clarify, modify, delete certain texts at various times throughout history in an effort to win arguments or score points in the constant warfare over religious disputes. Consequently, many of these documents are not to be accepted as literal truth. I think that that's going to be a real problem as we encounter these things in the public school setting.
I just want to know who is going to kill all the football players for touching the skin of a pig.
Well, that's certainly an important aspect.
That's right. Instead of a pep rally, they'll have a stoning.
Yeah.
Well, it can certainly cause a lot of problems unnecessarily, because if people want to learn about their Bibles or their religions, there's plenty of churches for them to go
Yes,
and learn them in. There's no reason that we need to be teaching this in the public school. We never have even touched on the concept of state-church separation and the issues that that can cause. But of course, by getting a very conservative-leaning court, we see that that's what part of that motive is, to be able to then rule judicially that these are not violations of that whole principle, which is what has made this country great for as long as it has. We're out of time for today here on the Atheist Forum, but next week we're going to be talking with someone from Planned Parenthood, find out about that, followed by somebody from the ACLU in the weeks following. So we have some good programs and topics lined up for you here on the Atheist Forum. We encourage you to listen, call in, get your Get Out of Hell free card, or insult an atheist for only $2. Don't forget Tom O'Brien today at 4 o'clock. Join us again next week. And now, along with Joe Reinhardt, Jim Peterson, Judy Adkins, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the story sounds a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City, Tampa Bay. WZHR, Zephyr Hills.
FM 104.3.
Listen.
Off. Compromise progress. I'm Mike Moss. Acting Attorney General Mac Whitaker